Gentlemen and ladies, let us resume.
Recommence.
Recommence.
This. Thank you for coming back after lunch. I hope the session will overcome the lunch-induced lethargy. But we are still sort of moving towards the Ilanot themselves. Now, somewhat more directly even than was the case in the opening session. I suppose the overarching theme of the second session is the emergence of the genre of Ilanot in a way that I guess I would sort of telegraphically express as a movement from using an arboreal metaphor to describe the spherotic world to the association between that, you could say, that metaphor and a particular geometrical schema to a kind of generic definition that weds schema with medium, that weds the arboreal diagram and the parchment sheet to create a genre that Kabbalists beginning around the late 15th century will come to call Ilanot. There are pre-15th century Ilanot, as we'll see in the third session, but they're not called Ilanot by anyone. If we're simply speaking in terms of the how do you say it? Like the lexicon of the Kabbalists, they will call what a 15th century or late 15th, early 16th century Kabbalists will call something an Ilan that 14th century Kabbalists would have called a Yeri'ah, which is the reasoning behind the title of the session 3. But I don't want to get too far ahead. I have 3 case studies to bring to you in this second session. It was hard for me to know whether that was too much material for one session, but we give it a go. The 3 are carefully chosen. The first is a work by the name of Chajes Orah, Gates of Light, by one of the most famous of all and most popular of all Kabbalists, Yosef Gikatila. This book was, for most of the history of Kabbalah, the first book recommended to beginning students of Kabbalah, Chajes Orah. In fact, it was published in 1517 in Latin before it was ever published in Hebrew. And one of the most iconic pictures of the Sfirot is taken from the frontispiece of that 1517 Augsburg publication. Let's see, one second. I didn't put it, I think, in this porte here, for example. Just if you want to see, that's the frontispiece that's been hand colored. In this case, this is in Bill Gross's collection, 1517 Augsburg. Interesting in its own right. Already seems to express what has by that time come to be the iconic representation of the tree of Sfirot as we know it to this day. But that's not what I'm concerned with in today's session. What I want to do is a bit more ambitious. First of all, we'll look at a diagram that's been part of Chajes Orah since its composition, undoubtedly drawn by Gikatila himself. It's in all of the oldest manuscripts, and in fact, it's a diagram that's reproduced with astounding consistency over the ages, all the way into the print and the countless editions of Sha'arei Orah that have been printed since the 16th century to our day. And we'll ask ourselves, first of all, based on the image that you have on page 12 of your booklet, what is this diagram? I guess, as I said before, is this a tree? Are we now looking at an early tree diagram? Regardless of your impressions, we'll then do what I assert is methodologically appropriate, and that is have a look at the text of Sha'arei Orah that explains what Jikatila thought it was. Yes?
What year is this around? Is this diagram from?
Well, it's in the oldest. This particular manuscript is, I believe, 14th century Ashkenazic. You can double check with the link that is in the PDF version. I knew in the days leading up to this workshop that I was going to have to remember a lot of details. So, but that I don't always remember every detail. So the links are there for me and for you to make sure that I'm honest. But I will say, having compared many manuscripts and many printed editions, that this is a diagram that is quite faithfully reproduced by copyists and then printers. And we'll see at least a couple of examples of that. And this is one of the books that Arthur was kind enough to pull from the Katz collection so that you'll be able to see in just a few minutes an early edition in print that, like all editions of Sha'arei Orah, as far as I know, includes this diagram. What makes it a little more ambitious is that I don't only just want you to see what Jikatila says he's done with this drawing, but in this case, as well as in the second case study, I will be bringing you a classical work of Kabbalah composed roughly around 1300, give or take some decades. The two works being Sha'arei Orah and a work known as Ma'arechet HaElohut, which I perhaps somewhat tendentiously like to translate as the constellation of the Godhead, because of my obsession with the astrological or astronomical connections of this Kabbalistic lexicon, and that you've already heard so much about. In any case, two seminal Kabbalistic works. By the way, Ma'arechet Elohut is often recommended to be the second book that one reads when entering the study of Kabbalah. You read Sha'arei Orah, step 1, Ma'arechet Elohut, step 2. Both, especially with Ma'arechet Elohut, the structure of the Godhead becomes much more foregrounded, whereas in Sha'arei Orah, we have more of an emphasis on the Sfirot themselves and their various appellations and correlations and associations. The two are considered to be complementary. But again, I didn't quite get to the end of my thought. What's ambitious about what I want to do in this session is to take the earliest editions of these texts in print in the 16th century and show you how Kabbalists circa 1500 are reading the diagrams circa 1300. Primarily in order to convey to you the point that I've made now just orally, which is that the lexicon has changed, and by the time the circa 1500 Kabbalists are looking at these things, they are talking about Ilanot in ways that we haven't seen previously. And then the third thing that we'll do in this session is to look at least at the very beginning of Moshe Cordevero's treatment of the structure of the spherotic world, or the divine world, and this will complement the discussion because it's precisely in this section of his magnum opus, the Pardes Rimonim, that he both provides us with a clear definition of the genre and opens with a discussion in which he contrasts symbolic Kabbalistic iconography with what he's really looking to establish in this part of the Pardes, which is Kabbalistic drawings that represent the actual structure of the Godhead. David and I were having an interesting conversation over lunch about ontology versus epistemology, and Cordovero is an example of a kind of philosophical Kabbalist for whom the ontological or structural claims are problematic, but nobody can entirely escape them either. And so with some apologies, you'll hear more, at least in this session, about structure and ontology than you will about the epistemological side of things. And let's get right to it. Page 12 of the booklet, or on the big board behind me, a very early Kabbalistic diagram in a very popular Kabbalistic book that gets printed and copied and then printed over and over and again. Is this a Kabbalistic tree? You can see, I'm sure, that it has Keter, Chokhmah, Binah, Gedula, Gevurah, Da'at going into the central line, Yisod at the bottom of the central line here, flanked by Netzach and Hod and Malchut at the bottom. That's a pretty spherotic tree-looking diagram, right?
Is this a menorah or is this a tree?
Well, this is what I'm asking you to reflect upon. You see a menorah in this image. I think people who are used to seeing Kabbalistic trees might say, oh, this is a Kabbalistic tree because it's the array I'm familiar with, although it's not using medallions and channels to connect the sphirot. It's still the spherotic array. It looks kind of like a stick figure-y Kabbalistic tree. Maybe not the best possible one, but not too shabby either. Yes, Catherine?
Could be a willow.
It could be a willow. Okay, we're getting botanical again, are we? Okay. A weeping willow?
It looks like to me a person in a longer jacket.
A person. Okay, so we have a menorah, a willow tree, a person.
One-legged.
Well, no, the 2 feet at the bottom.
Right. Well,
Suggesting you
here again, with apologies for my positivism, the text says it's a person.
Oh.
Yeah, it's a person. It's not a menorah and it's not a tree. Let's have a quick look at the text, if Prezi is cooperative. This comes in, I'm now using a version for ease of reading to get through this rather efficiently. This is taken from the Warsaw, relatively late printing of Sha'arei Orah, but
Do we have it in our?
we have it in the library.
Not
This
No. Okay.
this one, I don't know why,
Okay.
didn't get in, but I can still
Send it.
manipulate the PDF in the Dropbox folder afterwards.
Terrific.
I didn't put everything in the
That's fine.
pamphlet, but this is what it says just before. You could read it in the manuscript, or we can just read it quickly here. This is Jikatila's explanation. It comes within the context of a discussion of da'at, which is, you might say, the 11th sphira, but there isn't. We're not allowed to have 11 sphirot, right? Sefer Yetzirah told us axiomatically there's got to be 10. So if you say da'at is there, something else has got to go. In any case, this is a discussion of da'at, and you can see here it's coming in. He's saying something about da'at is the kav ha'emtza'i. It's the central line, and this vav. He also is Jikatila very interested in connecting the tetragrammaton with the spherotic system. So it's not a coincidence that it's a vav. Olim milimata ad sof ma'alot to ein sof. But anyway, how does this work? He says, Ketzad. How does this work? Hare kava emtza'i. The middle line is da'at. It goes all the way up to Ein Sof, which is keter. This is one of Jikatila's opinions, that keter isn't really a separate sfirat, should be conflated with Ein Sof. Im ken nimtza shu emtsa'i ben chokhmah ubina krovim leketer. Da'at is somehow this synthesis of chokhmah and bina that are close to keter, and this same central line goes down between Gedula and Gevura. It's still central, and this central line goes between Netzach and Hod. It's going through the whole system. And now the name Yud He Vav He, as you can see, it's the secret of the name Yud He Vav He. The Vav is, which is also the central name of God between Ehyeh on the one hand, which is associated with Keter, and Adonai on the other, which is associated with Malchut. This is the central thing. And now he says, skipping about a little bit, on the one hand, it goes, Da'at goes in the middle, Biguf Ha'ilan, which sounds like on the one hand, he's invoking this image of the Ilan from the Bahir, also the first Kabbalistic book that a rabbi takes credit for writing, the the Perush of Yitzchak Sagi Nahor on Sefer Yetzirah, also uses a lot of this kind of botanical language without committing to any kind of ontological statement with regard to it. Da'at goes as if through the trunk of the tree, reaching Ein Sof, connecting all the sfirot. V'hineni mitzayer lefanecha tzura. I want to draw before you a form, shemimena tavin ha'inyan. From this form, you will understand the matter. And just as in the name Yud He Vav He, you have a central name, and it's Da'at, and it's the middle between Ehyeh and Adonai, from top to bottom. So too, between El and Elohim on the sides. By the way, Sha'arei Orah and these associations is frequently inscribed in the early parchment Ilanot. So this content will be inscribed in the spherotic medallions on those parchments. And this is the tzura. Actually, what did I do here? Thought it was right here that he said something about the human form. It was very botanical. What am I missing here? Could be that it was before, where he can basically, let's see. Come on. Shem El, V'Tiferni, Barach, Kavim, Saib, Barach, Vura. This is kind of embarrassing, but I could have sworn there was a text here that makes it quite clear that his intention in drawing this figure was to invoke the anthropomorphic metaphor rather than the arboreal metaphor. I will look at the next break. I'm pretty confident I can come up with the goods, but I don't want to get detained on it too much. In any case, let's for the time being take note of the fact that the language of Ilan is invoked here on the one hand, but he doesn't say Hineni mitzayer lefanecha Ilan. He says Hineni mitzayer lefanecha tzura, and referring to this term tzura, form, which has which is the term used in both Hebrew translations of Platonic and Aristotelian materials, and with those associations in each case. This is his vocabulary.
Here's a question.
Yes.
far afield here, but so is this a common idea that dot is the channel between the sphirot?
It doesn't really win out. You won't see this. I mean, this book sticks around and this diagram sticks around, but not this emphasis on da'at. I think it's earlier in Sha'ar Hey that he makes the more anthropomorphic argument for da'at as the spinal column, and that these are arms and so forth. But it's not as proximate.
So
The word goof itself is very anthropomorphic
That's
versus Geza Ilan.
true, although they use both often to describe the trunk. Guf Ilan is a pretty normal way of referring to the trunk, but well taken.
Is he saying I'm drawing an eland, and my metaphor for it is I'm going to show you a body.
I don't think so. He says, I'm drawing a form. This is a form.
But doesn't he call it eland?
He says, da'at is like the trunk of a tree. Da'at pierces the spherotic system like the trunk of a tree. Here, now let me draw you a form so that you can understand what I'm talking about. He doesn't yet have a language that would bring him to say something like, let me draw you an elan. Now, in the 16th century, a Polish-born, as you'll see on page 13, in just my own little annotation, in the 16th century, a Polish-born in Bologna, educated rabbi by the name of Matityahu de la Cruz, wrote a commentary on Sha'arei Orah. He also wrote a Hebrew commentary on Sacrobosco's astronomy, which I couldn't not mention. He's a Kabbalist who's interested in astronomy and writing commentaries on both Kabbalistic and astronomical works in the 16th century. And when he gets to this place in Sha'arei Orah, in a commentary that first appears, to the best of my knowledge, in the Offenbach, I think in the Offenbach printing of Sha'arei, is it Orah that you brought, right? Here, this is Penn's edition, Offenbach.
Jewish?
Jewish, yeah. This is kind of a shout out to our beloved local collections of Hebrew rare books, and just to know that you needn't necessarily go to Hebrew books online. You can just beg Arthur to show you this,
Dropsy College.
Yeah. So it's extraordinary, really. This is the. This is in Sha'ar Hey. Wait, I have this as well. Yeah, I have. That's page 13 of the booklet. This is how it looks in the original. Because there's food on the table, it's we can't circulate the book, but perhaps in the intermission,
During the
Arthur
break.
can monitor the inspection of the original. Let's just have a quick look and see what he's done here, and then we'll back up for a second to the introduction. He's speaking about this question of da'at, and he says, commenting, u'be'emet כאשר תראה בציורי האילנות שציירו בעלי הקבלה, תמצא כי התפארת קרובה יותר לכתר מקרבת החסד והפחד אליו, במדידת הקווים שביניהם כאשר תראה בציור שלפניך, and so forth. But for him, already writing in the early 16th century, if you want to have a kind of external frame of reference for how these things should properly be understood from a structural point of view, you look at Ilanot. This seems to be, it's a matter of interpretation, but I think he means already the genre. I don't think he means the schema. באמת כאשר תראה בציורי האילנות שציירו בעלי הקבלה. When you see the drawings of Ilanot drawn by masters of Kabbalah, you will find that Tiferet is closer to Keter than it is to Chesed or Pachad. This is quite interesting to see. We may even see in our third session an early Ilan that seems to suggest this proximity of Tiferet to Keter. Main thing
It does say exactly what you're saying. If you just go down to Halacha,
where?
right,
In,
right at the beginning, 2 lines from the end of the line, at the beginning where you have that little window with the diagram. V'halacha tziyuran al seder shal
It's
shlotam.
on
We-
page
you're-
13, page 13 of the booklet.
Yeah. Binyon ilan ba'anafav, v'sifav, v'zehu sheparu ilan ha'kabbalah.
but this is from a different place though. This is from the Hakdama. If you're reading on page 13, I skipped. This is, I went from the commentary on the fifth gate to the same man. Yes, it is, 100%.
But here it's saying it.
Yeah, here he says it straight up. I also have it in the Warsaw edition here. Halachat tziyuran al seder ishtal shalutam v'hista'afutam kedimyon ilan be'anafav u'seifav. This is just, here you have the drawing, their drawing of the Sfirot in the order of their emanation, I suppose you would say, or their unfolding, their emergence, and their branching out in the likeness of a tree with its branches and twigs, or however you say seifav. And that, zeu kar'u ilan Kabbalah. This is what's called the Ilan of Kabbalah. So, is there anything else that's...
Next line has Kedavar Gufani. Chaser mi.
Now he's moving into... Hold on. You would say, I would say, more philosophical problems. How we are going to deal with the implication of the corporealization of the divine that's implied in the very division of the Godhead into 10, let alone its visualization in this way. Something that troubles many Kabbalists. And he's getting more into this even more. Al derech hatzura gashmi'it. It troubles many of them. But it's not taking him here to the anthropomorphic reading of this. For him, this is already an ilan as a schema and as a he's aware of the genre, and he calls it that.
I was curious about this anxiety about anthropomorphizing the
Or-
Godhead.
or-
To what degree does that account for the movement away from the schema to the tree as a schema to form? Because it's metaphor. This is the form of it. It's not a tree. It's the form of a tree. Especially in light of Christian iconography, which I'm sure that they were exposed to.
Yeah.
Was this their way of mediating that anxiety?
I think that most of when they talk about their anxiety, it seems to be primarily of a philosophical nature rather than some kind of concern about in being too similar to Christian typologies or Christian figures. The Kabbalists may have even anti-philosophical positions that they may criticize philosophers, but they almost always accept as axiomatic certain fundamental principles that they accepted from Maimonides, and I suppose indirectly from the Greco-Arabic philosophical tradition. And so they know that it's a problem to, I wouldn't say simply anthropomorphize, but corporealize in any sense, to speak about this is what we were talking about over the break, to speak about a map of the divine topography and to spatialize the Godhead is a red flag immediately to anyone with a philosophical background. You don't want to attribute space to God. So you have either just apologetics, or you have an attempt to say what we express in terms of space is another way of representing causality, for example. We use a language of space when we actually mean that something higher isn't really higher. It's somehow causally related to what comes thereafter. But yeah. You would think that they would be perhaps more concerned about the Christian resonance, but we have, of course, the famous critique of Abu Lafia that the Sfirot are worse than the 10 hypostatic powers of God are 7 worse than the Trinity. So some people saw the connection already in the 13th century. Okay. Is there anything else here that we want to look at quickly? It's rich, but basically you see that it's been established as a genre for him. This, with the next jump, we arrive at Ma'arechet Elohut. This is an anonymous work that has attributed to an unknown, otherwise unknown Kabbalist, but is from roughly the same period, and it too received a commentary around circa 1500, commentary known as Minchat Yehuda, often just called the Chayat, the Perusha Chayat, written by a Spanish exile of 1492, who suffered greatly in the expulsion, named, did I say this already? Named Judah Chayat, who came to Italy, and I suppose the kind of the underlying story of the Chayat as a commentator on the Ma'arechet, which was a Spanish work as well, but played very well in Italy, was very popular in Italy. His big problem upon arriving in Italy from Spain was that the Italian rabbis didn't know Zohar. He found it unnerving that circa 1500 Italians only knew Zohar if they found it in Recanati's commentary. This would, of course, be remedied mid-century, in the mid-16th century, with the Mantua and Cremona editions of the Zohar. Some people, I think, have suggested that the efforts of the Chayat to champion the Zohar in this commentary were critical to bringing the Zohar to press and raising awareness among Italians of how important the Zohar was. So you have, from a kind of history of the book point of view, another, I think, wonderful example of a kind of a dialogue between the centuries taking place on the page, not an unknown phenomenon in these worlds, but some maybe early 14th century text speaking to a very early 16th century, or vice versa, the 16th, circa 1500 response to this 2 centuries earlier exposition of Kabbalah, which is of at least equal or greater length than the work upon which it's commenting, and very much focused on adducing Zoharic material to show why, in this case, even though it's a Spanish work originally, Ma'arechet Elohut, you really need the Zohar to understand Kabbalah, and the Ma'arechet Elohut also didn't have the Zohar as the authoritative text that was determinative of the correct Kabbalistic opinions.
Yossi?
Yes.
Just a quick historical question. That's a pretty strong claim, that there's no awareness of Zohar in early 16th century Italy.
Yes.
I mean,
Other than Rekanati.
Nachmanides is already there. The Ledigo.
Nachmanides has no Zohar.
No, but I'm saying to read it, there must have some reference point. I mean, for it to be published there. So you're just saying there's no literary evidence for an awareness of Zohar.
Yeah, you see the Zohar is just missing from Kabbalistic writing in Italy until the publications of the mid-century. I mean, you could say that this Chayat commentary is really signaling to the Italian readership that they must take Zohar much more seriously. But Idel wrote about this also quite extensively in Kabbalah in Italy. The Italian rabbis are not reading Zohar manuscripts. Some people say that they had a hard time understanding it. They didn't appreciate it. There's a kind of generalization made about the Italian Kabbalists that they're mostly autodidacts and they have. But the Chayat is a champion, a publicist of the Zohar. I feel like the Chayat is first published also in Mantua, like the Zohar, roughly in the same period, but it's circulating in manuscript for decades before. We don't need the printing of this book to bring his commentary to the attention of the rabbinic elite in Italy of the 16th century. But this is not absolutely central to the case study that I wanted to bring, which is very much, again, a kind of another example of how the lexicon has changed, the perception has changed, and a genre has been identified and named. In this passage, you have on top the Ma'arechet Elohut. Is this in your thing? Yeah, okay, this is page 14 and 14, 15, and 16. Not the easiest in the world to read. And I think, is that what it is? Is that why? If I remember correctly, I took this is the Ferrara 1558. Kind of like the Zohar was printed in Mantua and Cremona more or less the same time. The Ma'arechet with the Chayat's commentary is also printed in Mantua and in Ferrara at the same time. Mantua got into the booklet. I got a fairly clear copy here of the Ferrara pages for the Prezi. Let's just have a quick look at that. I would like to spend a nice chunk of our session with Cordovero, so I don't want to be delayed too long on these passages. But here you can see he's saying about the Nizdamen Bishmo V'seder Tziyur Makom Hasfirot, and the order of the drawing of the place of the Sfirot. Hu shemesimin shalosh harishonot zo al gav zo, or zu al gav zu. How do you arrange them? You put the three top sfirot one on top of another. Mishash ulemata. No, yeah. Mishash. You have the three on top of the six. The Chayat has. I don't think it's necessarily right in the part that I've reproduced for you, but the Chayat also is the guy who came up with Segolta, Segol, Segol as the shorthand for the spherotic structure, using the cantillation mark and the vowel to indicate the nabla delta, which is which, but the pyramid and then the two inverted pyramids is the correct structure. But for the Ma'arechet, first three stacked. Then you have the 6 that are triangulated. Shesh lemata mihem letzad yamin chesed, letzad small pachad, leumato, ulemata mihem ben chesed ve'apachad atiferet. He's also invested in a slight asymmetry. Tiferet nota klape chesed, ulemata me'atiferet el hayamin, netzach lemata me'achesed, letzad small, and so forth. It's basically this image I brought you also just so you could see in other manuscripts, like this one is from an Italian manuscript. Did I write? I just wrote the British Library call number for it, but it's from Ginazzano. How do you say? Lizelle Ginazzano. He's also using basically the same structure, very popular in Italian Kabbalah. We'll see it in the most magnificent of the Ilanot of the Renaissance tomorrow morning, especially.
Malchut is also offset.
Yeah, it's all a little bit crooked here. They're very committed to the top, but in any case, it's not exactly the same, but close. Okay, now I should have probably made a point of writing this. Could be that from here, we do best to just jump ahead a little bit. In here, he comes back to this subsequently about how you put the 3 on top of each other and so forth. Worthy of mention, at least, at the beginning of this discussion, he explains why the 3 should be stacked one on top of the other. There's a reason for it, a kind of philosophical reason, you might say. The reason is, he said, Ta'am asher rashmu ba'alei ha'avodah gimel rishonot zo al gav zo v'lo rashmu behem yamin v'small. Why are they not arrayed right and left, but put in a line? ומפני אשר זכרנו, כי מגדל מעלת, or מגודל מעלת השלוש, because of the sublime, high degree of these first 3 sfirot, והעלמתן, and their hiddenness, their occult, hidden, right? אין כוח בדעת האדם להתבונן בעניינן. We don't have, the human mind does not have the capacity to contemplate their actual nature, we might say. To say right and left means you have some ability to grasp them and to plot them on different places, like sort of on the X and Y coordinates. You have some grasp of them. But, vilomar b'yamin is all klal. כי הימין ושמאל הוא רמז לכוח ההנהגה הטובה והיפוכה בתחתונים. Right and left are very lower human world maintenance categories. This is good, this is bad, right and left. ובהיות שאין השלוש האלה מכלל התבוננות האדם. Seeing that these first 3 sfirot are not within the cognitive powers of humans, לא ייתכן לומר באחת מהם לא ימין ולא שמאל, אלא ראוי ליחדן בייחוד שלם ושווה ופשוט בכל צד הרחמים גמורים. We have to, it's not appropriate to do anything other than to unify them, to unite them in one unity, equal, simple. They're all perfect rachamim, and we hint at this by having them, or you may say it's a hint to this nature is in this representation, which is quite interesting now that I'm reading this, to say that he doesn't seem committed to this being the actual structure either. It's still, this language is that the drawing is a remez to a philosophical idea.
What do you think he means by b'chol tzad harachamim hagmurim?
Well, just that that the highest level of the Godhead has no admixture of anything but pure goodness. It's
Okay.
it seems a bit contradictory to say it's beyond good and evil, therefore it's pure good. But that is kind of a Kabbalistic assertion that beyond good and evil, there's just pure good. Like even in later Kabbalah with the higher rungs of the Godhead, that as partsufim, as countenances, you are always getting it's beyond good and evil, but not to neutrality, but to pure goodness. Yeah.
I was just going to make the point. I think with the discussion about ontology and epistemology.
Yeah.
Where, he's saying he's not really phrasing it as, see, this is really how they are.
No.
Rather, it's a diagram of the limits of the human mind.
Yes, you're right.
So
You're right.
So
You're
it's
right.
very interesting.
He's also considered to be a very philosophical Kabbalist. That's one of the things that irritates the Chayat about him, is that he's so committed to maintaining his philosophical credibility as he presents the Kabbalah, that he's missing certain essentials that the Zohar brings. If we were speaking in the way that Sholem would have spoken, we'd say, well, there's no myth in Ma'arechet Elohut. It's a distillation of a kind of Kabbalistic philosophy.
It also suggests the friction between epistemology and ontology, because you're using language to describe the indescribable. You can't use words to describe a world where words can't really reach.
Yeah, well, you wouldn't think you could, but some of them do anyway. But yeah, but there is certainly a tension here. Let's see what the Chayat does with this. Dean, maybe that it's continued here. Yes. That was a kind of a little bit of a bonus, because he then continues in the chapter, in the text itself of the Ma'arechet, to speak more about the drawings at greater length. Amru l'tzayeret tiferet be'emtza. You should draw it with in the tiferet in the middle. Let's see, where's the she'eritan here? Here, okay, it's here. יתבונן למשכיל בשאריתן להעמיד שורשי העניינים על מתכונתם ויציצו פרחי הענפים ופריהם בעיתם, and so forth. Okay. Very arboreal, botanical language here. You should look at these things and see the roots of the matters and the flowers of the branches and their fruits at their proper times. We should speak first about the three uppermost qualities, midot. They are rishonot, the first of the binyan ha'adam umi binyan ha'olam, vehem shorsho v'ikaro. It's a whole mixture of these languages, human, arboreal, structural, mi binyan ha'adam, mi binyan ha'olam. Im be'el lo nishla mikol makom hen ha'ikar. והשורש ממנו ושאריתן הן השלמתו בהשתלשלות התחלתן, and so forth. I'm sorry if I'm getting lost here in the thicket a little bit. But here's the Chayat. Hold on. Speaking a lot about branches here, but there's really just one section that I really want you to see here. This is a continuation of this long discussion in the Chayat. Okay, you know that if you're in my position, you're getting closer when you see a picture. He says, okay, yeah, it's definitely here. I just want to make sure I don't want to miss the רגע. Well, okay. Sorry.
So I have a question then.
Yeah.
We saw on page 13,
Mhm.
which is the Hakdama to the
Shari Chesed,
Perush al
Shari Ora.
Shari Ora.
Mm-hmm.
We see lines that are
Yes.
drawn that indicate lines of affiliation somehow.
Mm-hmm.
But then they don't appear in, and this is printed work.
Yes.
Right, so are the absence of line, but then it does seem that in Ma'arechet HaElohut on pages 14,
Mm-hmm.
that's a case in which we don't see lines of affiliation.
I think that
And yet they're both printed
I think
books.
that I have done some checking in the manuscripts on this question, and it's in my checks are not conclusive.
Yeah,
Because some manuscripts have lines and some don't.
Okay.
I also I'm inclined to suggest that that later printings will
Insert.
add some lines because it makes them look more like the Ilanot that have come to be iconic
Okay,
by the time that the
interesting.
book comes to press.
so that, related to that question is something that I think David Stern mentioned
Mm-hmm.
before, when he was asking about temporal and spatial.
Mm-hmm.
So, again, this is out of ignorance. When I think of Ilanot, I do tend to think of them as having, that they do imply temporality. This leads to this, leads to this, leads to this, whereas concentric circles, I
That's true.
don't see that. And so, maybe there is something inherently genealogical in the schemata of the tree.
I want to, you're rightly bringing me back to this point from the first session, and I should supplement what I said then with the following. Although it is, I think, true that the classical Ilan is not like the Peter of Poitiers Rhodolus giving you a timeline of the divine.
Right.
And while it is actually more true that the Lurianic rhodoli do precisely that, it's undeniable that there is in the presentation of the spherotic system a sense of movement within the structure itself, and you can't. So many Kabbalistic discussions are about the consequences and implications of the different
There's before
pathways. Yeah, but those pathways are all within that single denary arboreal schema. Whereas in the Lurianic Ilanot that we'll see tomorrow, you literally have to roll the scroll
to move on.
to participate in the unfolding of the divine, which is so much at the heart of Lurianic Kabbalah, that kind of almost biological, developmental sequencing of the divine life. So I'm saying sort of davar bihipucho, the arboreal image is more static than the Lurianic Rhodolus, but it still has an internal dynamism that's undoubtedly there. The other thing that David raised, and I point this out in the JQR art. I point out two big articles are not out yet because they're in such good journals that you have to wait for years to see anything. All right, so the JQR one is Lurianic, but I have another one coming out in Harvard Theological Review, which I'll have a few more gray hairs apparently by the time it appears in print. But there I wanted to share another argument for why Kabbalists would use the tree and not just concentric circles that goes beyond the mytholegomena associated with the tree in Jewish culture. And and doesn't simply say, well, they were appropriating a popular schema from natural philosophy either. And that is that they needed more from their diagram than the circles could offer. This gets back to the point of synchronic or diachronic diagrammatics. Like what do they need the diagram to do? And your question just reminds me of the fact that even in the arboreal schema, they needed the diagram to show thesis, antithesis, synthesis. They needed a kind of square of opposition or triangulations and
Well, the perot and anafim and all the stuff that we were just reading indicates they needed relational.
That's
terms.
right. And even though the cosmic spheres are moving and really in Aristotle their movement is what generates. It's generative of the complexity of creation and the elements themselves and so forth. It just wasn't enough, I think.
Thank you.
So, okay, now this is good. I think probably we don't have enough time to do the deep dive here, but this section just before what I would like to read with you is where the Chayat is mining the Zohar for statements that will corroborate a particular imaging of the divine world. And one of the sources that he finds seems to suggest this placement of the left on the right and the right on the left. And there's a confusion of where things are truly located that makes him launch into a really interesting discussion of perspective, as I mentioned before, which I think is salient to what we're doing, this issue of whose perspective are we seeing them from, but it's kind of like this is so confusing that I'm reluctant to jump in on here because it's the kind of the punchline that I would like us to get to, is just after that. We can maybe have a quick look at it, that he says, he's speaking about, you can see we are on I guess you have this in your pages too, it's just not on in this Ferrara edition. He says, we're talking about this is on the right side and Pachad is on the left. We have no disagreement. He says, Lo matzati terutz lazeh ki im lomar she'aba likrat chaveiro yemino keneged smolo. Let me tell you, when you come and you see your friend, your right is opposite your friend's left. Smolo keneged yemino, your left is opposite your friend's right. And that's why netzach could be drawn. V'im ken hanetzach hamitzuyar kemitzuyar be'ilan, like drawn on an ilan. Litzad yeminenu, on our right. Hu litzad smolo shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Could be that Netzach should be considered to be on God's left, because we see it on the right side of the Ilan. And Hahochu yemino shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu v'smol etzleinu. Lefi zeh ra'ui v'hechrachu lomar. If this is the case, then we have to say that achesed v'apachad ein ra'ui l'tzayrem k'mo shehem ata. But the problem is, based on this Zohar, you can't play fast and loose. If you want to say that Netzach and Hod are reversed, you're going to have to reverse Chesed and Gvura also. But that's not. But we don't have a consistent Ilan that does that inversion. Ein rawi l'tzayrem k'ma shehem ata ela Chesed l'tzad smolenu shehu yemino shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu ve'apachad l'tzad yeminenu shehu smolo shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Says that we don't see an Ilan that's consistent in that inversion, but he says, and this is the part that I kind of love, it's like maybe less Kabbalistic and more historical, tells you a little bit where I came from. Ve'ani me'id, and I testify, shera'iti be'ir echat me'Italia, nikret Reggio. I want to testify that when I got off the boat from the expulsion from Spain, and I went to Reggio, I saw biyad navon echad, some, wise person, Ilan shehaya mitzuyar bazeh ha'ofen. This person had an Ilan. Now, I don't think he means that he had a manuscript codex in which in the margins there was a scribbled arboreal diagram. I went to this guy's house, a very respectable person, and I saw he had an Ilan. Shaya mitzuyar bazeh ha'ofen. Ve'amar li gavra rabba asa'o. I heard, he told me, this wasn't some stam schlepper Kabbalist, right, that made this Ilan, but a very great man, presumably a great Kabbalist, had drawn this Ilan. V'chipasti achar hasiba v'lo matzati ki im zot v'gam siyu lezeh ma shematzati b'sefer HaZohar. And he goes on and continues explaining in his way, which is interesting, but basically, in terms of evidence for a shift in the lexicon, you see the Chayat. This has got to be circa 1500 mamash. He's in Italy. He's in Reggio. Rich people have Ilanot, and they take them out and show them and say, a great man made this Ilan. And some of them have strange shitot that he tries to figure out, where did they get the source for this?
So I'm thinking something, Nomi, I think it was Nomi who, when we looked at the concentric circles, who said you have to think of them as spheres. Was it who said that?
Yeah.
Maybe, yeah. So the thing about this problem with the Ilan is that you cannot possibly three-dimensionalize it and still have the problem exist. Because if, in other words, if it's three-dimensional tree, then then the right and the left are, it doesn't, that's not a problem. There's something static about them that because you can't conceptualize it three-dimensionally in the same way, I don't think, unless you turn it into a plane, unless you set it up on this plane and then you have
Yeah, I have.
Cylinders going down from each.
Right.
In other words, there's something that
No,
says,
I-
I am two-dimensional.
Yes, I do understand what you're saying. You see now on the internet people trying to three-dimensionalize these Kabbalistic trees. But we don't see any evidence of that in efforts made in this period. But
But that has some implication also for the ontology versus epistemology. It would seem to favor epistemology, although
Look,
I'm not sure why I said that.
I hear what you're saying. I should, at this point in my life, have more of a ready answer for this. It's not that I've not thought about it either. But I'm also, I can just say that perhaps we can infer from the fact that when, even in the Chayat's commentary here, when he's questioning the perspective, he is saying, when I look at an Ilan, I am either facing God as I face my friend, or I'm adopting God's perspective. So in a certain level, it could be that in this two-dimensional figure, we still have in the background the other primary metaphor for the structure of the Godhead, which is the human form, and that our ability to project the human form onto this arboreal figure, knowing that our human form can be represented as mapped to that figure, but is nevertheless a three-dimensional object in space, makes some kind of conceptual possibility for maintaining a three-dimensional view of the scheme.
I had a wrong reading, Va'asa'o Gavra Rabba. here's
Oh, that
this
he made the
Ilan, he
tree
made
into a
it
Gavra
into a
Rabbah.
Gavra
Yo,
Rabbah. I don't think that's the
right. I
correct
don't think it
reading.
is, but it's
Yeah,
cool.
Yeah.
The other thing I just want to say is that a kind of historical, philological footnote to this discussion might be that it's worth remembering that even mathematicians and specialist writers on geometry in this period were notoriously sloppy about distinguishing 2- and 3-dimensional. Let's just say they used 2- and 3-dimensional language interchangeably. Like we see, for example, we might say, are these circles or are they spheres? Are these squares or are they cubes? We would think which is it? Now, I mean, there's at least one really interesting article on Giordano Bruno. And now you look in his most professional works, not anything occult works, but works on geometry, that he'll go in one sentence, he uses 2-dimensional language, and the next sentence he uses 3-dimensional language. So I don't know like exactly what the nafkamina is, other than just saying the fact that this looks to us like a 2-dimensional figure doesn't mean that they were committed to its 2-dimensionality, and I think it's hard to imagine that they would have been. So, okay, let's just see if there's anything else that I terribly want to tease out of this. Other than the fact that we're getting very close by the time the Chayat writes this commentary, circa 1500, to establishing what will become, by the early 16th century, kind of iconic spherotic tree. You can see, Ha'ola mikol zeh, what is the bottom line, he says here? Shetziur ha'ilan, the correct drawing of the ilan. Now we already have that conjunction, that tziyur ha'ilan, not just, right? That tziyur ha'ilan kemi shederech letzayro b'zeh ha'ofen, zehu ha'ikar v'ha'emet. I'm now...
No, ha'emet v'ha'chochma v'ha'chesed.
Okay. Rega. It could be v'zeh ha'ofen, zehu ha'ikar v'ha'emet. Zehu ha'emet. והחוכמה והחסד הם ימינו של הקדוש ברוך הוא, ממש. והבינה והפחד וההוד הם שמאלו. וזה כנגד בעל ספר מאירת עיניים, כי אמר כי משהו מצויר באילן לימיננו הוא שמאלו של הקדוש ברוך הוא. There was this discussion is invoking Yitzchak de Minaco again in the section above the one that we read in the first session. כי אמר משהו מצויר באילן לימינו שמאלו של הקדוש ברוך הוא, משהו מצויר לשמאלו ימיננו. Okay, and I think, let's see, maybe good enough, really. Maybe good enough. You got to know when to quit, right? And I want to have some time with Cordovero. All of this to say, basically, Ad Kan, around 1400, Kabbalists are pretty invested in figuring out how things should be laid out. They draw tziurim, they draw tzurot, pictures, forms. They use arboreal language, they use anthropomorphic language. But we don't see a genre anywhere. We don't even really see a clear naming of the schema as an ilan, or something of that sort.
So is that smichut the first time?
Well,
It says,
yes, that tziyur ha'ilan. If it's not the first time, it's got to be one of the earliest, for sure. Yeah, because it's late 15th century, now, again, we'll see more of this in the third session, last session of the day. what he would call an Ilan, circa 1500. He was around considerably earlier. They weren't waiting for someone to come up with a name for the genre, to start taking parchments and inscribing diagrammatic forms with lots of annotations in and around them, but they hadn't named them, simply put. But I don't want to jump ahead to that discussion just yet. I want to go to. Look at, I really zoomed in right there. Mm-hmm. I forgot I was so high tech. Okay, now to Cordovero, with whom we'll spend the last part of our session today. Cordovero,
Page 17.
Moses Cordovero, Moshe Cordovero, was the leading Kabbalist in Tzfat at the time of his death in 1570. He was a neighbor, literally, of Joseph Kairos in mid-16th century Tzfat. And a number of people have pointed out the similarity between Kairos' undertaking in the Beit Yosef and Cordovero's undertaking primarily in Pardes Rimonim. That both of these works represent efforts in the generation after the expulsion to collect and assess the legacy of primarily Spanish rabbinic creativity of the preceding centuries. So a kind of massive undertaking of preservation and assessment in Cordovero's case, it was complete by the time he was in his mid-20s, quite remarkably. We all know that had anyone ever cared about this business of waiting till you were 40 to learn Kabbalah, it would be like saying wait till you're 40 to play in a rock band. There would just be no history of Kabbalah. So Cordovero was very precocious in his work. By his mid-20s, he'd accomplished this amazing feat of summing it all up with an attitude to boot. Very confident about his ability to know everything that had been opined over the hundreds of years of creativity, Kabbalistic creativity that preceded his own efforts in the mid-16th century. And in the Pardes Rimonim, I just want to say one more thing, and that is that he is perhaps the kind of the last of the great Spanish philosophical Kabbalists. I still feel like I'm learning more about this myself all the time. I didn't really get this education in a systematic way as a student, but you got to know more philosophy than most students of Kabbalah get in our Kabbalah studies classes, I think, to make sense of what's going on here. But Cordovero was honoring and struggling with this sort of philosophical legacy, and you feel it on so many of these pages, the way he ultimately deals with the problem of the implication of corporeality and the very imaging of God as Sfirot and as a tree is fascinating. Like he has a, we're getting really ahead of myself, I wasn't even going to speak about it, but one of the things that he says that's so poignant he raises it, if I'm not mistaken, in his Or Yakar commentary on the Zohar. He says, most students of the Kabbalah start with Sha'arei Orah and the Ma'arechet, and quite interestingly, he says they're learning the Sfirot in order to use the Sphirotic system in their prayer life. They want to, like, we haven't even touched yet, where it's premature, on like, how do you use Ilanot. We haven't seen any Ilanot yet, so I'll be perhaps excused for not having talked about how to use them yet. But even in terms of thinking about the payoff of imaging the Sfirot in a certain way. Well, how is that useful to a Kabbalist? For Cordovero, it was very clear that the usefulness of the imaging of God was first and foremost in the act of prayer. So you would be praying with Sfirot in mind, because your prayer would be that act that was designed to have an impact on the internal flow within the Godhead that would bring about the result that would be good for the cosmos and good, hopefully, for you as an expression of the cosmos. But he says there, all of a sudden, you see him almost, you can imagine him going like pale. He says, but all of these people who are learning Kabbalah now begin to pray, and they have a picture of a Kabbalistic tree in their heads. This is like idolatry. To take an image, to take a picture of God with you into your prayer, it's horrifying, he says. So every Kabbalist is an idolater. He's really concerned. He throws up this alarm. Oh, of course, I'm like, it's almost, I have this problem, like I start telling a joke and I can't remember the punchline. But because here it's really important, his language is so interesting. You see him working his way through this problem until he finally gets to this point where he says, you know why it's okay? It is okay, because he says all of Jewish life is based on the spiritualization of material forms. Our tefillin is material, the candelabra is material, the 4 species, the arba minim is corporeal, the sukkah is corporeal, the matzah is corporeal, everything's corporeal. And these corporeal, objects are vessels for, and this is where his terminology is extraordinary, something like hitlabshut haruchaniyut bigashmiyut, or something like that. You're nodding because you remember the terminology. I can look it up on the break. It's no problem, but it's an extraordinary statement where you see he kind of reassured himself that actually it is okay, even as someone who's will constantly be sort of backpedaling on things that seem too corporealizing for someone of his philosophical sensitivities to get on board with. But this is, anyway, so Cordovero goes through in the first 5 chapters of the Pardes to give all kinds of, what are the Sfirot, how do we know there are so many? And then in the 6th section of the work says, okay, now we have to decide how to image these, how we have to understand their structure. And I need to do my work of collection and miyun, I have to classify and determine, as Yosef Karo would do in the Beit Yosef and subsequently in the Shulchan Aruch. I got to get to a bottom line, which is the correct opinion. And I have to, unlike the Shulchan Aruch, I have to, and more like the Beit Yosef, I have to show all the steps. I have to justify my assessment on the basis of demonstrable reasoning and textual proofs from the Zohar and demonstrative proofs, logical proofs, and so forth. So this is what he's doing in the 6th section of the Pardes, and I've just brought you the beginning because it has the 2 things that I wanted to highlight in this particular section. Although the very next section of the Pardes deals with the channels. We've talked a lot already about the 10 sfirot, but the Theosophical Kabbalah not only took the 10 from Sefer Yetzirah, it also took the 22 from Sefer Yetzirah, the 22 letters of the Hebrew alphabet, which they sort of port to the interconnecting channels between the Sfirot, and he has to get into a discussion of how those work in the next part, and it's very relevant to the imaging of the Ilan, and also just basically how does the Godhead work in terms of its internal connectivity. So very interesting discussions there in the very next section of the Pardes. If the Sfirot are actually different from each other, then how do they communicate with each other? Because as everyone who knows, let's say, what should we say, Foucault's order of things, and the principle of resemblance as being at the heart of these signatures in creation, that similarity is what creates a connection between two things that we would not ordinarily think of as being connected, and the connection being invisible to us. That's the meaning of the occult, is that we can't see it. How are occult connections created? They're created by similarities. So you see Cordovero saying that in the next part of the Pardes. He says they can't communicate if the similarities don't exist. How do the similarities exist? They exist because this is a fractal system. He doesn't use the term fractal, but he says, he already has a long line of Kabbalists who've said it before him, but big emphasis on the fact that every sphira contains all of the sphirot. And if you want to understand how the network communicates and how the divine shefa, the abundance from Ein Sof, manages to get through this network, you have to understand that at every node there is a movement to establish connectivity based on the internal similarities between two otherwise distinct sfirot. So if Chesed has to communicate with Pachad or Din, right? It's either going to happen when Din Shebechesed, this is good for all you Omer counters, Din Shebechesed is connecting to Sfirat HaDin, or Chesed Shebedin is connecting to Chesed. But you need those Bechinot in order to establish connectivity. And now, because I can't end this little aside without a codicological moment, that's why there are volvels in early manuscripts of the Pardes and Asis Rimonim. Cordovero says, you want to understand this, have a look. He makes in this 1548 Vatican manuscript an Ilan that we would consider the iconic spherotic tree with volvels. And on each volvel, all 10 spherotic names are inscribed, and you can spin them around, and you can get to the full Google of potential routes through this network.
I don't know if this is one.
This is the Aleph that we'll talk about. This was all a kind of a lengthy aside just to tell you that there are other good parts that are relevant to our learning that we can't cover now, but recommended for future reading or further reading.
Is this a holograph of the Ramak, this manuscript?
This, you mean an autograph? An autograph, like in his own handwriting?
Yeah.
Well, I was hopeful that it was, because it does have a 1548 colophon, and it's signed like Moshe, at the but there is a fairly good reason to suspect that only undoubtedly, perhaps a few years later, or decades later at the most, still in the 16th century, that someone copied this from the Ramak's autograph and copied the colophon as well with the date. We have, as far as I know, only one document, which is a legal document from a Beit Din in Tzfat, that includes the Ramak's signature. And I compared, for what it's worth, the signature in that document, which is presumed to be authentic, to the signature on the colophon, and it does not appear to be the same hand. So I'm not comfortable saying now that it's an autograph, but it's a very early manuscript. I think it's absolutely clear that it's a copy of the autograph. And it's it's a manuscript that has a very interesting history. It's, of course, as you can see, in the Vatican. It was the copy of the Pardes used by Athanasius Kircher. And it contains Kircher's marginal annotations. And so in Kircher's works that include treatments of Kabbalah, he's citing from his readings based on this precise manuscript, which I kind of love. And includes, by the way, Kircher includes diagrams that he saw in this manuscript in his works, at least what is Oedipus Aegyptus, one where he also has a whole section on hieroglyphs, and then he goes from the Egyptians and the Egyptian hieroglyphs to the Kabbalah, and he's using this manuscript and its images. So let's have a look at it. Also, I wanted to make sure I use these images because the Vatican charged me 100 euros for each one.
Oh.
Yes.
So we can amortize.
So, yes, thank you. I won't tell you, I didn't realize I'm going to submit the receipt. No, I know. Well, there's an extra charge for the printing also. Yes. Well, this is, you know. Yeah, I got one of those. I thought, oh, that's nice. Honey, I got a letter from the Vatican. Because sometimes I get nice letters from the Vatican. I have a nice relationship with the Vatican.
Nice enough.
Not that nice.
Right. Well, I had to write them because actually I was offered a friend's discount by the keeper of the manuscripts of the Vatican, and somehow he didn't communicate it to the billing office at the Vatican. So I'm going to work on it. I'm going to try to do them down. Oh, sorry.
Is that Javier or Javier?
I'm hopeful. Otherwise, just yes.
Was employ astronomical imagery in light of his concern about relationships between the Sefirot. I mean, it sounds
He does.
There's a very strong application of astronomical imagery.
He does. He has a long section here already in this chapter in which he engages in this, on the one hand, an attempt to clarify the relationship between biblical terminology and astronomical terminology. Like whether this, I referenced this briefly in the first session, are the biblical rabbinic firmaments, the reki'im, which are usually presumed to be 7 reki'im, are they to be associated, do they correspond to the 7 planetary bodies of the Ptolemaic system? He immediately says they don't, and all of the planetary bodies are in one of the reki'im and so forth. But he's very involved in that, and he also, right after, he spends many lines explaining how, of course, you should not take him literally when he speaks about the spatial relationships pertaining to the world of the divine and the Sefirot. He does explain that actually, the Sefirot lead to the intellects, which lead, to the Reki'im, to the intellects, to the Galgalim and the Mazalot. So he has a completely seamless chain of being that is hard to reconcile with his protestations, that there's nothing at all spatial or ontological about the Sefirot, that it's causal or epistemological. Yes, but he does here nevertheless not say that the most appropriate way of imagining the Sefirot is as concentric circles, even though the discussion does go there as well. He's in here more invested in the arboreal form. It's triumphed And he opens this section with one of the clearest statements of the Ilan as a genre in its period. The other one that I would point to, although I didn't include it in the readings, is by a Christian of roughly the same period, Guillaume Postel, who wrote in one of his works a list of the genres of literature or creativity, you might say, of the Jews, and the list goes something like the Bible, Talmud, Midrash, Midrashim, whatever he writes it in Latin, and Ilanot.
Wow.
That's for him very important. I think
Wow.
there's a whole story here also about Christian perceptions of what's central in Jewish Kabbalah. Guillaume Postel.
16th century, very
He's a
interesting.
cartographer as well.
Postel, yeah. Somebody that in Judith Weiss, who's a very fine, relatively young Jewish thought scholar in Israel, has written her dissertation on. She's the one who first brought my attention to this passage in Postel.
Fascinating.
I had worked on him years before in the context of spirit possession
Sure.
and demonology, but turns out wherever I go, Postel follows.
I was just about to say what a nut he was.
Yes, thank you. Yes, the same could be said. Okay, the first section, the first line simply say what I'm intending to do. This is a good philosophical exposition. Oh, how did that happen?
Oh, just time.
I didn't move around enough? The whole thing is off. It also is in the booklet. I have no idea why. Was it on before?
Go look. Why-
Yeah, it was on about 5 minutes ago, went off. And but you weren't
Okay,
speaking.
we have to warm up again.
It'll. Okay.
Yeah, it's blinking, it's gonna warm up again.
Okay,
Yeah.
good, good, good.
This happens, this happened past years also.
It has.
Yeah.
Okay, we're getting there.
Done pretty well so
Seems to
far.
be waking up, slowly,
So
slowly.
complicated.
Shall I cut the lights for a second, even though it's in the brochure, so I can make it just that much larger?
Sure, sure.
We're
There
back
we go.
on, we're back on
You're
lights.
fat.
Oops. Okay. This is a less in the wrong place. Let's go back. Okay. All right. This is it. So, in his typical exposition, what's the intention of this whole sha'ar, this gate, or larger, of which there are sub-chapters, prakim. Hakavana b'sha'ar zeh hu ma shira'enu. המקובלים האחרונים מציירים להם צורות. We have seen that the later Kabbalists, meaning from Nachmanides, which we would consider, whom we consider an early Kabbalist, the 16th century Kabbalists think that the Zohar was written in antiquity. Those are the Mekubalim HaRishonim. And that beginning with Nachmanides, you have the Mekubalim HaAcharonim, the latter-day Kabbalists, who we would call otherwise today. We've seen that, so the Kabbalists, mitzayrim lahem tzurot. They draw forms for themselves. Bi'inyan asfirot, ze omer b'chom, ze omer b'chom. There are different opinions. We've already seen that, and Shem Tov ibn Gaon, and Meirat Einaim, everyone, right? Thank you. Ulefi ha'emet, ein echad min Hatzaot ole al hada'at. Yeah, I don't really like any of their. Ein Rega, what did you say? Ein echad min hadeot ola al hadat.
That makes sense.
Yeah. ובשאר זה נבאר רוב הדעות ונגלה הדרך שיעבור לו האדם. Thank you. All right. Now to the generic statement. Perek Aleph B'inyan Tzurat HaSfirot, with regard to the form of the Sfirot, in other words, Seder Amidatan, a language we saw already in the Ma'arachet, Rabu bo hadeot. There have been many opinions. V'tziru lahem hamekubalim tzurot b'yeriot gedolot v'karaum ilan. Doesn't get any more straight up than right there. The Kabbalists have drawn themselves forms, and they've drawn them on yeriot gedolot, large parchment sheets. V'karaum ilan. They call these things an ilan. That's what an ilan is. It's a, I would say, it's a tziur of it's a drawing of a form on a large parchment. That's what's called an ilan. And so, and Hilo could say ad kan. That sentence is the generic statement that, along with Postel, basically lets you know, if there was any doubt, that by this time Ilan is the name of this genre, and this genre is constituted by the wedding of this Kabbalistic drawing and a particular medium, the parchment sheet. Now, that aside, I want to, now in the time that remains in the session, just look at what he does in the very first of the spherotic imagings that he has brought for that he's adduced for his assessment of its veracity, and I'm keen to show this to you because it allows us to see the Ramak's own self-awareness of the distinction that he believes must be made between an imaging of the Godhead that is reflective of its actual structure and an icon of the divine that has merely symbolic value and is expressive of an idea but not representational with regard to the reality of the divine structure. And I use the word reality because the Ramak himself uses the term mitziut a number of times in this chapter. He makes it very clear. He's talking about mitziut. I think that it's still okay to translate as reality in the 16th century, mitziut. Seems okay. I'm always nervous, but let's see. So there's another kind of secondary payoff as well here, which is especially of interest to people who are interested in diagrams and in the relationship between text and image. And that is this particular section of the Pardes and this discussion allows us to see whether there's any added value in the image that isn't in the text. Is this diagram of, we'll see in a moment, of the Aleph simply capturing or representing what he has described in his text, or is there something else that it's doing? What's the added value? Why is it there? Is it communicating something beyond that which the words describing the Aleph provided by Cordovero express? So let's have a look. Yeshiratza l'tzayrem b'tzurat Aleph. There were people, Kabbalists, who thought it appropriate to draw the sfirot in the form of an Aleph. I'm trying to find a good magnification. Ketzad, right? Ketzad chalko. How did they divide it up? How did they make an Aleph into an image of the sfirot? Okay, well, now maybe I should back it up just slightly, or you can look on page 17 of your booklets, if that makes it too small.
That's good.
It's okay still? Okay. Ketzad chalko. Harosh. Ketzad. How they do it? Chalku haro, et harosh we would say, lishlosha chalakim. First of all, they take what he calls the head of the Aleph, which is this part that I'm showing you with my cursor. They took this and they divided it into 3 sections. Harishon, Keter, Elyon, Vitzad Yamin shall Rosh Harishon, Chochma, here, and Ve'asmali, Bina, here. So that's the first thing. This part of the Aleph is Keter Chochma Bina. Fair enough. Second, Vehakav Asher Lemata Mehayud. This is also a Yud, right? This is the Yud part of the Aleph. So and this is the Kav, the line that's under the Yud. Shehu Vav Shel Aleph. Kara Rosho Hayamin Chesed. Here in the diagram it's inscribed with Gedula, for whatever reason. Virosho Hasmali, the extremity, the head literally, but the top of the left side is called Gevura. Vea Emtsai Tiferet. This is the shorthand for Tiferet, Taf. Tiferet is very central. Umi mar'e motnav ulemata. This is a direct reference to Ezekiel. You'll see it's mi mar'e matnav ulemata. Just bear that in mind. Remember tomorrow, maybe even in the 3rd session today, this invocation here of Ezekiel and the Sfirot. I said at the beginning, Kabbalah, this is quite banal, right? But Kabbalah is a form of Jewish esotericism characterized by this notion that the divine can be imaged as 10 hypostatic powers that can be theurgically manipulated by human action. But this is a medieval form of Jewish esotericism. Ancient Jewish esotericism was very much focused on the chariot. The Ezekiel's chariot from chapters 1 and 10 of the book of Ezekiel, and of course endless amounts of rabbinic speculation in chapter Chagigah of the Babylonian Talmud and the Hechalot literature. This is huge. And the Kabbalists didn't just forget overnight about the chariot. And I didn't incorporate it in a very meaningful way in this overview because I had to be selective, but it would be fascinating to do just a session on the Gilgulim of the chariot in the Kabbalah. The chariot is kind of the visualized Jewish esotericism par excellence. Yeah. So, and how is this chariot communicated in a Kabbalistic idiom? It's really interesting. But unless we had a session, it may be difficult.
Diagrammatically, it exists?
Yes, diagrammatically, it very much
Well, I
exists.
was going to say in the earlier session, one of the earliest show was in shape of a wheel.
Well, yeah, you're thinking at the bottom of the Ilana Chochma. It's entirely possible that may have something to do with the wheels of the chariot, but we have much more direct diagrammatic representations of different kinds. Let's see if we can find a way of squeezing it. I do want to speak a little bit in the 3rd session today and at somewhat greater length in the 1st session tomorrow about the chariot as it is pictured in the classical Ilanot. But neither of the Ilanot that we'll look at has the full-on geometrical, diagrammatic representation of the chariot. They're both more representational than they are geometrical. But I'll be happy to go there. To remind me if for whatever reason I don't. But yes.
One question about this.
Sure.
I can see now that you said that's an olive.
Uh-huh.
I can see that it's an olive.
Mm-hmm.
Possibly. But
Like.
no, when I first looked at it, see, compared to the olive that's in the
Yes, and a little
middle of the commentary,
yeah.
That does look like an olive.
Mm-hmm.
When I first looked at this, I was really puzzling what this was. And
Right.
The only thing that looked to me like was a bird upside down.
Yes.
And so there's all sorts of details there, including including the little fingers. The
That's right.
Yeah, fingers and toes.
That's right.
Thumbs and
Fingers
so
and
on.
That's right.
So, am I seeing something?
You're right on, and you are pointing out precisely the features that I wanted to invoke when speaking about the added value of this image over and above Cordevero's description of it in the text. We have elements here that he simply doesn't mention that can be read. This image can be read as saying something that goes even beyond his textual description. I get to it in a moment, but you're absolutely right. It's not a typical, not your typical Aleph. Yes.
Fingers and toes, I see.
Yes.
What's poking out from what I guess should be an underarm?
No,
Here? No, these are
No, no,
the
up.
here.
Yeah.
Oh, in other words, I see what you're meaning here. Yeah. That's funny. The truth is, I don't think that's meant to have meaning.
I think it's the hair from the Tefillin Shal Rosh.
Yafeh. Yafeh. I don't know. That's a... Yes, it does look like that, but I was reluctant to suggest that we're talking about armpit hair here on the Sfirot. The Kabbalists are capable of being relatively coarse about such matters, and body hair is one of their favorite subjects. But still, I'm not sure about that particular detail. But let's look at this in one second. I just want you to hear first his text. We got to here. So this is netzach over here. Keneged a small is hod. Masha keneged, something like that. Sheben shnehem ze yisod. This central portion is associated with yisod. Ve'oketz tachton malchut. This little stinger. Spitz is here malchut. Vizo or zu tsurata. This is the tsura of the form of this aleph. Ad kan lishonam. Apparently, like he's found a source where they've sounds like he's quoting somebody who explained the aleph as the image of the sfirot with these words.
He started out saying, "This is the way that people have tried to depict this."
Yes.
And here's another way. He's not saying this is. We shouldn't all run out and say, "Oh, yeah, Ramak says that we should do it this way."
No, on the contrary, he's about to diss it. He's about to blow it out of the water.
Okay.
He goes through one after the other, telling you why they're ridiculous and absolutely wrong, until he tells you what's right.
He says at the beginning,
That's right.
Right.
Nachon. Yes.
What is written on both hands of the finger of the hand of the?
Here, in the inscriptions here, it's chamesh etzbaot yamin, and here is keneged chamesh etzbaot yadav. This also might be yadav. Sorry, chamesh etzbaot yadav, and because here it says keneged chamesh etzbaot raglav, keneged chamesh etzbaot raglav. Here already we can say.
He doesn't say Yamin or Shmol because he doesn't know if you're facing
Yeah.
this way.
I do want to say, look, we've read now the text that describes this image. You see, it doesn't say anything about etzbaot. No fingers, no toes. So does anybody want to venture a guess as to why there are fingers and toes in this?
Sefer Yetzirah.
Exactly. Exactly. So in other words, not only the text riffs on Ezekiel, but the image is actually winking at Sefer Yetzirah in a way that isn't at all present in the text. Sefer Yetzirah is part of its axiomatic presentation of the 10 Sfirot, which, if it's not clear by now, and I haven't really devoted any time, so it might not be, have nothing to do with the 10 hypostatic powers of God that are at the heart of Theosophical Kabbalah. The 10 Sfirot of Sefer Yetzirah are not these. Is that known, or do I need to add a moment on that subject? Sefer Yetzirah is a pre-Kabbalistic book, okay? Sefer Yetzirah is nobody other than like Aryeh Kaplan or that type of person or Kabbalists since the 13th century would say that Sefer Yetzirah is a Kabbalistic book, which means actually just a few scholars in universities are left. But we know that Sefer Yetzirah is not a Kabbalistic book. Nevertheless, it is the book that provided many of the axioms that were at the dear to Kabbalists as if they were given on Sinai. I mean, the whole question of the status and reception history of the Sefer Yetzirah is fascinating. When Saadia writes his commentary on Sefer Yetzirah around 900, he effectively makes the book canonical, because he doesn't just write books, commentaries on anything. It goes through a couple of hundred years of reception as the Jewish work of science, and then Isaac the Blind gets his hand on it and begins its reception as a Kabbalistic book with endless efforts to read it in terms of this new theosophical orientation that isn't part of Sefer Yetzirah. Now, on one leg, what does Sefer Yetzirah actually say about the Sfirot? It says a few things. First of all, as I said, it says there are 10 of them. 10, not 9, 10, not 11. But what are the 10? Now, that I don't want to go too far down this digression, but in the very first chapter of Sefer Yetzirah, it says, what are the 10 Sfirot? It says they are, he's described, they're Belima, like we saw already today, but he calls them Omakim. They're 10, an Omek is like a depth, but I would say kind of 10 vectors. Okay? And what are they? They are the 4 directions, up and down. In other words, the 6 vectors of 3-dimensional space, plus the vector of time, the omek, how does he call it? Omek lifnei, omek acharei, or something like that. The before and after. And omek tov ve'omek ra.
Right,
Value. Right? These are 3, you could say 3-dimensional space, time, and value are, because 3-dimensional space is 6, value is 2, and time is 2, you get, those are the 10 Sfirot. They're not numbers. It's quite odd, right? I mean...
But the term Sfirot is taken from Sefer Yetzirah?
Yes.
Yes, okay.
Without question, the term comes from there. Why that term is used there and what exactly would be a good translation is vexing. People sometimes want to translate it as numbers, whatever. The Kabbalists themselves debate endlessly the correct understanding of the term. They just know there are 10 of them, but they're certainly not, chesed, gvura, tiferet, netzach, hod, and yisod. They're time, space, value, or as Sefer Yetzirah otherwise expresses it, olam shana nefesh, olam being world, space, shana, time, nefesh. The human element is value. Humans are the ones who say this is good, this is bad. It's not out there in nature. Or as Isidore Seville says, homo annus mundus, in a diagram that shows up in Sefer Yetzirah manuscripts as well. Go figure. One of the things that Sefer Yetzirah says when insisting on the 10ness, that there are 10 Sfirot, axiomatically is 10 Sfirot, 5 fingers against 5 fingers with the lashon in the middle, and 5 toes, and 5 and 5 on the bottom with the brit machria b'neihem. You have an image of, I don't think Sefer Yetzirah is intending for us to presume a kind of anthropomorphic form of the elements of creation necessarily, but is invoking the fact that somehow the human body also expresses this base 10 constitutive property of creation, and with 5 and 5, and some kind of, what do you call that on like Moznaim, when you have the scales, but the middle point of the scale.
Fulcrum?
Yeah. Anyway, I mean, that's the picture in Sefer Yetzirah, and so it's in a way this diagram is, I don't know if you would call it a midrash on Sefer Yetzirah, but he's remembering or invoking the fingers and toes of Sefer Yetzirah's 10 sfirot and adding them to the Aleph without a textual warrant, but it's an opportunity. Yeah.
So there's no bird there?
No bird. No, you'll have to wait for birds.
Is there a reason why the Aleph is slanted?
You mean like this is rounded and this is squared?
If you look at
The whole angle of it?
Why is it slanted and not standing on its two legs?
I don't know. I don't think he relates to that. And
Probably because he
Well,
wants
you wanna
there
get
to
the
be
two
a top and a bottom, right? He wants there to be a head and
Right.
he wants
That's good.
Keter, Chochmah,
Keter to be
Binah to be
on,
on top and Malchut to be at the bottom.
well, that's fair enough. But you don't think you could accomplish that without
No.
twisting the Aleph around a little bit?
Well,
Yeah, could
I
be
guess
that.
that's-
So it's a distortion of the Aleph, an inevitable distortion of the point he's trying to make. Yes.
Why is he talking about Oketz Atachton?
Well, this protrusion, yeah.
Yes.
Oh, because you say where do you see that in a real Aleph?
No. Why is it Oketz Tachton and there is no Oketz Elyon?
Ah.
Whereas the three of them are the Oketz Elyon.
Right.
It is not said.
It's true. This is a kind of Oketz Elyon. The Keter looks like it could be described similarly. Also, it's a bit strange that he could have made a bottom yud as well. Oftentimes we see the Aleph described as a yud, a vav, and an inverted yud. And here this is very squared and this is very rounded. And the Malchut has this kind of, if you'll pardon me saying so, between Yisod and Malchut, a kind of phallic, especially the fact that it's between the toes of Netzach and Hod. And I presume that this is also part of the content that it's trying to transmit. That there is this also a human image in the Sfirot, and so it's a compelling candidate for being the true shape of the Godhead, the Aleph. Right? This is all relatively reasonable, but he says, "V'hinei ritzo." It seems like he's saying "ritzonenu," or it should be "ritzonam." No, ritzo does say "ritzonenu" though, right? Lichtov tzurat ha'adam elyon b'tzurat aleph. Okay, okay.
Ritzonehen?
You might think so. I think he wants to say is that he's saying our intention, our will in inscribing this form of the supernal man, giving greater force, I think, also to the anatomical features that headed to the Aleph, in the form of an Aleph, B'tzurat Aleph, our intention is lirmoz ki kulo yichud shalem. We want to express the supernal man as a way of referring to the spherotic world in the form of an Aleph in order to indicate or to allude to the unity, the perfect unity of the Godhead. Afal pi, notwithstanding the fact, something eser. Okay, I think it is. Afal pi like sheha echad eser, that this oneness is nevertheless divided into 10 aspects. This is something that shemore, or I think shemore dvarim mechulakim. Even though we're talking about 10 sfirot, as soon as you say 10, it sounds like you're saying there are 10 different things here. You're making 10 distinctions within the Godhead. Nevertheless, they're mechulakim kulo yichud shalem. All 10 of them are really one perfect unity. V'zeh horeh b'dmut aleph. This is taught. Right? This is something expressed, taught through the figure, the image of the aleph, the dmut aleph. V'yesh k'tzat smach, kan, leda'at ze b'divrei harashbi. You might say, okay, this is the intention. The intention was to show, to make the point of this unity, and you can find some justification for it in the opinions of Rashbi. That's how he refers to the Zohar. Things that you can find in the Zohar and the Tikkunim. And then he goes into this passage that I will not read with you, but it's here on Mamash Avalpi. Kavanat Surat Hashem. Esther Sfirot Kenadav Surat Aleph Limos Al Esther Miuchadim. Aleph. The truth is, we don't really need to read more than that about this, because, to make a long story short, this is more or less his conclusion, that this imaging of the Sfirot as an Aleph is to convey, to teach us that despite the fact that there are 10 Sfirot, they are one. This is a message that we want to teach. That's Zemore al ha-yichud ha-shalem, the perfect unity of the Sfirot. But as he will say shortly thereafter, we still have to keep looking, because we're not trying to find icons that have a symbolic significance. We're trying to uncover the actual structure of the Godhead in reality, and he will not rest until he's done that.
So
now,
I'd love to make the observation.
Sure.
If that's the case, he's pointing to the Aleph as being the letter that encompasses all the unity.
Mm-hmm.
Look again at those two little armpit hairs.
Okay.
They add up to the number 22.
Oh.
Right? You have
Yeah,
five,
yes.
6 on each side.
Cool.
Now I give you 22.
Uh-huh.
I don't know why it's placed there, but
Right. I also don't know why it's placed there.
because it's nudative hair.
Well, he could have put one hair on each armpit, I don't know why he had to
And
put
speaking
both of
of
them
which,
on the
it's-
left.
It's the 22nd day of the Omer, so it's not so.
Unbelievable.
It all comes around.
I have one more. Though.
But it's not in the other ones.
Yeah.
But it's not in the
That's
other one.
interesting. Very interesting. I
It
had
doesn't
never
get
noticed
five or
that.
seven fingers either.
It's like a Miro drawing.
Right.
It's kind of-
He goes on. We can effectively take our break at this point. The next page that I brought, I wasn't sure if we would manage it. Would be another interesting example of how he's engaging with Sefer Yetzirah once again. Now saying that Kabbalists read Sefer Yetzirah in another one of its axiomatic statements about the Sfirot. According to Sefer Yetzirah, the Sfirot are described as na'utz sofan b'tchilatan u'tchilatan b'sofan, like the Ouroboros. Yeah, that they have a kind of cyclical nature. Their beginning is in their end, or a T.S. Eliot nature, whatever it is. And so he says, some Kabbalists thought that meant that the actual shape of the Spherotic realm was a circle that is somewhat like the face of a clock. He doesn't use the language of a clock, but he says they're all lined up so that you go around in a circle and begin with Keter, and you end with Malchut, and Malchut ends again with the beginning of Keter. And then he unleashes quite a rant on people who were so stupid to think that this is what Sefer Yetzirah meant. Promises he'll explain it in another chapter, which he does, and which he diagrams as well in another chapter of the Pardes, but says that this is an absolutely stupid understanding of Sefer Yetzirah, and he's so dismissive of it that in the first edition, printed edition of Sefer Pardes Rimonim that appeared in Krakow, I'm going to say 1571. I'm not exactly sure why, but I'll say it. 1571 Krakow, maybe, or 15, yeah. In any case, this diagram isn't reproduced. And there's simply a little caption from the printer in Krakow who said, I didn't want to waste my time arranging the letters because he says it's crap anyway. Why do I have to waste my time?
Did he do the Aleph though?
He did the Aleph. That was important. This one, he says, just imagine it. He also has he didn't print the Volvels either, but in the Volvel part, from the manuscript, he says, you have to imagine there are spinning discs, and he gives a very nice verbal description of what a Volvel does and how you can use it without going to the expense. I've never seen a printed one with a Volvel, although we do have examples of either a printed Sefer Yetzirah to which Volvels were added. Back in the day when people were still kind of playing with early printings as if they were manuscripts that could be manipulated as well.
1722 in Offenbach, even though it's totally different work, but in
Evron?
In Ivronot, they print separate pages for you to cut out the Volvels and then append them.
Also, the first edition of Sefer Yetzirah, I think, in Mantua has a Volvel page at the end.
With indications for cutting.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure.
But they're not, okay, fair enough. But not actually produced with Volvels. Even in Meir Bar Ilan's recent book on Sefer Yetzirah, the opening page is a cutout that he instructs his readers to assemble in order to understand the...
Gotta have skin in the game.
Yeah, exactly. So we'll take our, this time, somewhat shorter break and come back for facsimiles. And although they are practically worthless, I think it would be better if after the break we could clear the table of food.